You are listening to Come As You Are, the podcast. My name is Stephanie, and I'm joined by my two friends, Amanda and Tyler. We are a trio of coaches on a mission to ignite a collective movement where authenticity, self-discovery, and purposeful living take center stage. Each episode, we go live in the Kaya way. Kaya is an open invitation to show up authentically and vulnerably. It's a safe space to allow ourselves to be worthy and enough now. It's a celebration of our individuality and diversity. So welcome to the show. We are happy that you're here, and we invite you to join us in today's conversation. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, friends.
It's always fun when I'm looking down at my phone and then we go on and I'm like, oh, we're here. It's time.
Here we are. Oh, amazing. I'm so glad we're here again.
Yes, me too. How is the vibe today with all of you?
Well, I forgot it was Monday, so that's a promising start to the week. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
How about you, Stephanie?
How am I? I had to go through a lot of paperwork this morning because I'm about to sign a work contract, and it's very detailed. It's so detailed. There's so much stuff on like what I can and can't do and what I can share and not share and like all these laws, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just had to go. I mean, obviously, I want to read the whole contract and I want to make sure that I'm not signing like, congratulations, you bought yourself a mansion for 5 million. I don't know, right? So just reading all the fine print, and it's very exhausting for my brain to go through all these like lawy terms and sentences that never seem to end. Sometimes there's like a sentence that starts at the beginning, and then it says something like, you know, is like, this is included but not exclusively, blah, blah, blah. And then it lists all these things and it goes into really long paragraphs. And then you're at the end of the page and the sentence is still not over. And you already forgot what's at the beginning of the sentence. Oh my God. So I just like, my brain feels a little bit fried right now. But of course, also excited that I'm going to be going into this new work opportunity. So yeah, that's where I'm at this morning, or this afternoon, actually, for me. Amanda, where are you at?
Well, I'm at the morning. But for me, really, I spent this weekend doing a lot of reflection, and it's been an interesting process. I think when we really take that step back and look at like, what is holding us back, actually. So there's been a lot of like looking at fears from different angles, and it's been interesting, definitely interesting. It's been a ride of emotions and all the things that come up when you start like digging deep, which I appreciate, but sometimes it takes a minute to almost like recalibrate. Like, I don't know, do you guys get this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm curious because you've mentioned like, you know, fears are coming up, and, you know, as a coach, as a friend, I'm like, okay, Amanda, tell us what fears came up.
So for me, I think it's been a lot of looking at what I've let go of in the past. Like, I spent a lot of time and still like working through this, but I think for the most part, I'm really proud of how far I've come. But like in letting go of like the perfectionism, you know? And I think what comes with perfectionism is also this like need to control. You know, so perfectionism, control issues, those types of things that I can see, wow, like how far I've come from before, where it was like, I had to like have everything, like if I was missing a comma, it was like the end of the world. And this was like the worst thing ever. And now I'm like, let's just, you know, take the imperfect action. And so seeing that difference, because it wasn't something that I just woke up one day and I was like, oh, all of a sudden I don't care about, you know, being perfect. It's something that like over time, and there's also this like interesting experience for me, because it's like, I know I've really worked through this, but there's a part of me that I'm like, I don't want to fully let that go, because the perfectionism is also like a standard. Like, I like to hold myself to a high standard. And so I don't want to let that go, but I don't want it to become the like perfection paralysis. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's that, like, I think what I've discovered is that the difference between like getting it perfect and that being the fear that like, oh, well, if it's not perfect, like everyone's going to know. And if they're, you know, it's going to be, everyone's going to judge you, or, you know, there's going to be that like negative feedback. But there's this level of like, if I'm have a certain standard in how I like things to be, that's okay, as long as it's not like it stops me from taking the imperfect action to get it to the point where it's improved. I don't know if that made any sense, but I hope you guys can make some sense of it, because I'm like, that sounded just like a whole lot of words.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, as you were sharing, you have this comparison or this like connection between perfectionism and high standards.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really curious, like, what lets you know that high standards and perfectionism, they're connected? Because I see them as two totally different things.
Oh, interesting. So I think maybe for me, like how I went through my like letting go of perfectionism journey, it was like I shifted from it has to be perfect, everything has to be perfect, 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 to like, okay, well, there's a certain level of standard that I like to hold. And if it meets that standard, it may not be perfect, but it's good to go. Like, it allowed me to like not keep getting into this like perfection paralysis. Like, that's when I know I'm trying too hard to control or to make it perfect. And so in order, I guess, for like my nervous system to be okay with like, we're gonna let go of the perfectionism, it was like, we're still gonna have high standards though. Like, don't worry, we're still gonna have high standards, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Do you know what I mean? Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
I can so relate to this, that I also grew up with being ridiculously hard on myself, and thus having really high standards. Or I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg in those two things, but it's, yeah, I definitely can relate to this. And a question that came up for me in all of this now is like, okay, with these high standards, like, are they coming from like an entirely good place, or is some of it kind of like also still the, oh no, I need to control this? And who would I be? Because that's what's scaring me when I think about my high standards. And I think about, okay, who would I be if I was someone that didn't have these high standards? Because I feel like at least when maybe we have different definitions of high standards, but when I say high standards, there's judgment in it. Because I somehow silently judge the people who don't do it my way. And I kind of, so I feel like, oh, there's still a little bit of like fear. And I need to control. I totally got what you were saying in the beginning. Like, you know, my whole body like goes into this like major cringe state of like, I need to control it, right? And so for me, it's like, oh yeah, I know the high standard is just it's just how, I don't know, how I grew up. That was my survival. That was my like, yeah, this is how we're going to do it. It's going to be perfect, or it's not going to be anything, basically. And so when I think about high standards, a part of me knows, you're playing the fear game right now. I'm kind of like, I think there's still like so much fear that drives me to have those high standards. So that would be like maybe the question from my end is like, where the high standards coming from, and how do you maybe know? And not just for you, Amanda, but for Tyler too. The question of like, how do you know, like, where's that part of you, or how does it feel when you do the high standards, and is it like, oh, it had to be that, because I feel like that's fear? Or does it just really feel juicy and you're like, yeah, I accomplished this and I feel so great about it? Because I can do that too, and it can be really high standards. I hope that's making sense. Like I can have really high standards, I can achieve them, and I can say, like, I can really party on that. But mostly, as I said before, it's still judging myself, because if I were someone that would also do it with a much lower standard, there would be something inside of me that would be like, nope, can't do it like that. Nope, that's not possible. And that's how I know it's judgment and fear versus, you know, joy and flow.
Like,
My
y'all,
brain needs a minute too.
my brain already hurts and we're like 10 minutes in, but which is a sign of a really good episode. But I think, you know, we had kind of talked before we had started the show. We were talking about high standard, or not even high standards. We were talking about like the fears and the reflection and everything like this. And I think it all comes together, for me at least, because I know I have high standards. And Stephanie, what you said was so beautiful about how you secretly judge people who don't have high standards or who don't live up to like what you deem as like the high standards. And I do this too. And actually I was called out on this not too long ago. Like I'm in a coaching program right now where I'm in this like coaching program where like the coach called me out because I was like, it's all about social media and visibility and things like this. And, you know, I stopped myself from actually posting on social media because it's like I fear like the judgment. I fear like, oh, if I put myself out there in an imperfect way, then people are going to see that I don't have like high standards, or that I'm not living up to like the idea that I have in my brain or whatever. It's like a weird psychological thing. I know it is, but it's so like it's like this vicious cycle that we find ourselves in all the time, where we want to perform better, but when we go and we say we're going to perform better, it puts a lot of pressure on us, and then that pressure like actually stops us from actually making the progress, because we get so overwhelmed because we're like, oh my god, I want to live up to this high standard, and if I don't live up to this high standard, then da 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 da. And this is where I find myself in right now. Like as we're talking through this, I'm like, holy crap, this is exactly where I'm at. Is like I want to put myself out there more. I want to go live bigger and take larger action, but the thought of taking large action and really putting myself out there, it literally petrifies me, because I then think, oh my god, I'm going to be on display, and if I make a mistake, or if I fall, or don't actually succeed or whatnot, people are then going to come back and judge me, and it's because I judge them secretly, and it's this like whole kind of like battle that I find myself in, where it's like I'm almost envious of the people that are just out there on social media, who are just like putting it all out there, and like they don't give two shits what anybody is saying about them and whatnot. But like here, I'm like, oh, it's like this just vicious cycle of like having the high standards, and then that paralyzing me, because it's like, oh my god, I've put too much pressure on myself, and then I don't even do anything because I'm just so scared because of the high standards that I set for myself, versus like recognizing that, yeah, you can still have high standards but still make progress. And I don't know, there's this whole part of like how we talk about ourselves and practicing kindness and compassion, and also like we're like our worst enemies, and it's very complicated. That's what I'm recognizing as we're like having this conversation, is like it's messy. And I think we are so, and I would say this too, even as coaches, like I'm going to make a blanket statement and feel free to correct me if I'm completely off here, but I think as coaches, I think we have higher standards that we set for ourselves because of the position that we're in as coaches, and wanting to be like the leaders and the examples and everything like that. And it's really hard. It's really hard to live up to those high standards on a day-to-day basis, because every day is not a perfect day, and every day is not, 110%. Some days it's like, I barely get 50% out. And, I think acknowledging that and recognizing that, there's a fluidity to performance, and being okay with that, and being okay with like, okay, you might have an off day or even an off week, and like, that's still okay. Like, practicing that kindness, because I'm so self-critical of myself, and I put so much pressure on myself to perform and to be perfect. And I'm just like really mean to myself, to be honest.
And I don't think you're alone in that. I think we all have this experience, right? Of like putting that pressure on ourselves, whether it's a pressure self-inflicted or if it's like a comparison to others, like this kind of thing. I think we all do have that. Like, to me, this is what makes us human. And I think what's so important in those moments is that we do practice even just the awareness, right? Like, because if we have the awareness and we're noticing that this is happening, or that we are being judgmental of ourselves or others or whatever that is, right? That's enough. That we don't, because this is like, I can speak for myself here, because for me, and I think this is like the coach in me, that's like, I notice the thing, I have the awareness, but then sometimes that's not enough. It's like, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to take action? How am I going to change this? Because I have all the tools as a coach. Like, I have all the tools. Like, I know how to do this. I talk my clients through this all the time. And so why wouldn't I give myself that same gift, right? But sometimes it's too much pressure. It's too much of like, okay, in this moment, maybe the awareness is enough. I don't have to act on this. I don't have to do something about it. Maybe in the future I will, because obviously the awareness is coming for a reason, and I don't want to stay stuck in somewhere where I don't feel like my most authentic, highest self. But at the same time, also giving that space to just be in it, as opposed to this like, well, I got to do something. I got to do something about it. And I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but as you like talk about coaches, I feel like, I want to say I've talked to a lot of coaches, and I feel like they can like relate to this feeling of like, well, I know what I'm supposed to do, and I teach this to my clients all the time. So why am I not doing it? Or, why am I not doing it fast enough? Or like all of those things that come with the beauty of, I guess, being a coach. And I'm sure there's other professions that have this experience as well, but I think it's really relevant for coaches, especially.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is why it's so cool that we are having this conversation here. And it's definitely not the first time that we just spoke about high expectations and perfectionism on this show here. And I think this just goes to show how relevant this topic is, and how many of us are. I mean, we're just three, but I feel like sometimes we are really representing popular opinions among the coaching community, how important it is that we have this conversation here. I feel like, that question just never left me ever since we started with the conversation earlier. So I want to ask it again, because I feel like Tyler and I, we have a pretty good sense of, I think we have the same idea of like these high expectations and how we can self-sabotage ourselves with those high expectations. But I want to also ping pong it back to you, Amanda, when you spoke about having high expectations versus like the perfectionism. Do you find yourself also in that definition, or do you feel like when you spoke about like having these high expectations in a, I'm just going to say healthy way, is that something different for you? And if yes, like, how do you feel that? Like, how does that feel for you? If you do that, if you do something, you live up to your expectations, but it's still not like the perfect where you would maybe go paralysis, right? How do you notice that? Like, how does that feel for you when you experience it? If it's something different, maybe you also were able to recognize that it's not that.
Mm-hmm. So for me, I think it's not so much, it's more of like a self thing, where I'm looking at like, for me, this is what this is what feels good. This is what, like, even just visually looks good, because I'm a very visual person. I'm seeing things, seeing projects come to life. And so being able to look at something and be like, yeah, like that looks good. That makes me feel something, that's enough. You know what I mean? And yes, of course, like I can recognize that maybe not everyone has that same I don't even know if it's necessarily like, because we were talking about this as like high standards, right? And so like I think everyone's maybe, and then we're coming back to this, like everyone's definition of high standard is actually different. Like for me, I love graphic design. I'm very like love doing anything like creative, and that's what I'm super passionate about. And so like creating these visual expressions gets me excited, and I love to work on those types of things. Whereas maybe for someone else, that's not the case, right? And so what they might present might be different than what I would present, and what their eye likes and what my eye likes is different, right? So I think that's where like that letting go of judgment for me is where that comes in, because I do truly believe that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools that they've got in this moment, right? And so that keeps me in, okay, well, what can I do just for me? Like, I don't need to worry about the outside noise, because that's hard. That's really hard. I can't control what other people do. I can't control, but I can do it for myself. I can control what I can control, and the work that I put out into the world. And if that can inspire someone else, amazing, right? So I really try to stay focused on myself, and I think this is like where that judgment of self comes in, and then it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Where are we going with this? Like, because there is that healthy constructive criticism. I don't know if I really necessarily like that way of framing it, but do you know what I'm saying? Like and as I'm hearing this next idea, I'm like, that just sounds silly, but I'm just going to say it out loud. It's like this, like positive, negative feedback. Like it sounds so silly because like it's so like oxymoronic, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? It's like that feedback that we give to ourselves that has us feeling like this is going to help me grow, not shrink me, not beat myself up, not make myself feel like I'm a failure, because we're already good at that, right? Like we need to that's what we need to let go of. And so for me, I think what I focus on is this, like, okay, when I'm reflecting on these things, how can I look at this from a space of allowing myself to grow, to get better, to get, for the sake of this conversation, like closer to perfection, right? Like knowing that perfection is not, I mean, is it even attainable? But do you know what I mean? Like we're just getting that one step closer by taking that imperfect action, and only looking at this from like my perspective of, okay, well, what can I do better next time? And not in a, you sucked this time, so now you have to do better next time. It's like, you showed up, you did it, amazing. Now let's look at how can we improve on that. Not like, well, everything you just did was horrible and never going to be good enough, because that's not helpful.
I love what you're saying, Amanda, because I think we have to be really real and honest with ourselves and not sugarcoat sometimes. And that doesn't mean being like so hypercritical that like, again, you completely like paralyze yourself. But like, for me, it is this like, look in the mirror, actually look in the mirror and, and get honest with yourself. Because I think as humans, we sometimes think that we're better than we actually are, or that we're farther ahead than we really are. And then when we're really not, and then we get into this cycle of like comparisons, or this like analysis paralysis, where we're really struggling to to make progress because we're actually not being honest with ourselves. We're not actually showing up and like looking in the mirror and taking the time to do the reflection and sit with the uncomfortableness of, what do I not like right now about what's going on, and what am I uncomfortable with like in this moment, and where, how do I challenge myself, and how do I how do I grow, and how do I get more uncomfortable? Because we all know, and I think the three of us are really good at being uncomfortable. I will say that. Like, we're coaches. We actually are kind of like masochists when it comes to, yeah, masochists. We love the pain. We love the torture. We love like the hard work, and we're not afraid to put in the hard work and sit with the uncomfortable truths. But like sometimes and this is what I've been reflecting on recently, because it's now getting towards the end of the year where I do start my yearly reflections, and I start to do all of the, what is my theme for 2025, and really start to do all of that stuff that we love to do at the end of the year. And I've started to do some reflections myself, and I'm, and I've made so much progress this year in so many areas of my life. And yet there's still one area of my life that I'm really struggling with. And I really had to like look in the mirror and get really honest and really ask myself like the uncomfortable questions of like, why am I still struggling in this area? And full transparency, the area is finances. For me, the area that I'm still struggling with is in finances. And it's been a constant struggle that I've had for many, many, many years, like my whole life. And so, you know, and it's really forced me to ask the uncomfortable questions and get truthfully honest with myself about like, oh, I am bad at budgeting to start off with. There are like certain things around finances, like saving money. I struggle to save money, like, and again, as I've been doing these reflections and asking why and getting curious, well, I look at my childhood upbringing, and I look at the fact that my parents were people who lived paycheck to paycheck and never even had a savings, because it was literally paycheck to paycheck is how they were surviving. And that's the mentality that I adapted. That is the influence that I brought on. That's the identity that I would that was created when I was younger. Was, when it comes to money, we live paycheck to paycheck. We struggle. This is just who we are. And I've had to like now ask myself, okay, that's your parents' story. That doesn't have to be your story. And like, what story do I want to write for myself when it comes to finances? And these are really tough questions. These are really hard conversations to have with yourself, because, if I've learned anything in this coaching sphere, it's that at the end of the day, you are responsible for you. At the end of the day, it is your responsibility to make the change. It is your responsibility to take action or not take action. And so at the end of the day, if you're unhappy in a situation, or if you're struggling in an area, you have to be courageous enough, you have to be brave enough to say, what do I want to change? And then go work on making the small changes. And again, it's not about like doing a complete 180 and becoming like the master of money overnight, but it's bringing that awareness out, and then asking yourself, okay, what small step can I take here? And then what's the next small step? And then what's the next small step? But it's really uncomfortable to sit with that and to be real and raw and honest with yourself in the mirror and ask yourself those uncomfortable questions. But that is how we grow, and that is how we get better. And for me, what I've learned through therapy and through coaching is that when we do ask these hard questions, we come to a place of kindness, and we come to a place of compassion. And so that's what I've been working on as well, is learning how to be kind and compassionate with myself, because I have to be able to forgive the old version of me, the one who didn't know, who didn't know that like, oh, I get to choose my identity, or I get to like build my own relationship with money. Like, when you're 8 years old and you're seeing what's happening in your world and with your parents and everything like that, you just adapt this identity and you don't even realize it back then. And then you get into adulthood and you start unpacking all of this shit. And it's like, oh my God, I got to go back and I got to be kind to the 8-year-old who adapted this bad identity. And now as a 31-year-old, I have to say, okay, what do I want to change? What do I want to make different? How do I want to make improvements? And then again, practice that kindness and compassion as you're struggling to make the improvements, because it doesn't happen overnight. And it's really hard work. This self-reflection, this self-growth, it's really incredibly hard work.
I think what you both now touched on is this idea of challenging ourselves. And this is, I think, also in terms of what we kind of came from today with the high expectations, something that I'm really taking away is that, okay, we can have high expectations that can come from a really healthy place. And for us, it's the room where we allow ourselves to challenge ourselves. So when I say, for example, with finances, that, or actually, I'm gonna use an example that relates more to me because that will be easier to explain. So when you were talking about this, Amanda, I thought of myself, and I think I shared this last time or the time before, that I've gotten like a super video editing geek. And I just love that, right? And I do that for joy, and it's so fun. And of course, I want to gain more video editing skills over time so I can do more funny things, right? And so for me, yes, I do have a very high standard. So sometimes I go on YouTube and I listen to, or I watch other people's videos in that same kind of niche where I do video editing. And then, yes, of course, I make an assessment of, does that fulfill my standards or not? Just in terms of quality and the way they cut the scenes and the things they add and the overall value of the video and so on. So I make an informed decision when I watch those videos, or a lot of informed decisions. Okay, does that meet my standards or not? And then when I do my own editing, I have my standards, and the way that I can then grow is to say, okay, that's my standard. How am I gonna get there? I don't know yet. So I need to maybe learn a new skill. So when you were saying, Tyler, I really love that you're saying this, like we kind of love the pain as coaches. I want to just distinguish here that there's pain and there's suffering. So we as coaches, we decide when we want to challenge ourselves, when we want to grow. That is really the pain of growing. That is, we love to become a better version of ourselves, a version that is wiser or more knowledgeable or more skilled. And so we purposely put ourselves in these situations. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a coach. This can be any person on the planet. I believe that growth is what is our default. Like we need to grow, otherwise we just, like, we will die. So that this is kind of like what we do. We kind of put ourselves in a situation where we are being challenged, where there is a little bit of pain, and I think, Tyler, you gave a beautiful example of saying that you growing in the financial area of your life right now is very painful because you have to ask yourself a lot of hard questions. But then there's the suffering is something different. Suffering, I would say, is when you just accept what life is giving you, and you kind of say like, oh, life is happening to me, not for me. And you just accept it and you don't do anything about it. That's suffering, I would say. Like when you experience pain and you don't do anything about it, there's suffering, and that's on you. That's, I would say, like a little bit of the victim mentality maybe coming through. Mm-hmm. And I would say that what we love as coaches, I feel like I wanted to just point that out. What we love as coaches, or people who are really like into self-development, we love the growing. We love the pain of gaining something when we challenge ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely are in that camp as coaches. Is that like something? I'm like thinking of your contract that you were talking about before. Something like nobody gave me before I became a coach, like no one gave me a contract to say, hey, this is what you're signing up for. Are you sure? Are you really sure?
And we would have signed it anyway.
I still would have signed it. I still would have signed now knowing, right, the experiences that I'm having. But I think that's the scary part, right? Is when you are confronted with those things, it's kind of like, ooh, well, maybe I'll just stay comfortable in like this victimhood. And it's because it feels comfortable. I know it. I know what it's about. I've been there and I know how it feels, right? So sometimes it can feel, we're like looking at like the nervous system, the subconscious mind, like all of those things. And it wants us to say the same. It wants it because it feels safe. It feels comfortable. And I think what we're talking about is this opposite of like, well, let's challenge that and let's grow into a version of ourselves that is, I'm going to say more aligned, more authentic, like just more expressed. And I think that can sometimes be a bit challenging to actually express those things because we all know how much judgment is out there. And so that fear of maybe like, oh, it's not perfect. Oh, people are going to notice that like I spelt that wrong and then they're going to make fun of me or like, you know, all of these like, you know, ideas that we feed ourselves. And so I have no idea, like, where am I going with this? I don't know. But like, that's kind of just like what's coming up for me as we're like sharing what this all means for us. And I think for us as coaches, especially, because there is a certain level of, again, that contract, like this standard of, oh, well, like you have to inspire others and you have to be that example of what's possible. And these are all things that I believe for myself too. But at the same time, I think that doesn't mean that we need to show up as perfect. It means we have more of a responsibility to show up imperfect, to show people that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to not have it all together. Nobody does. Nobody does. So you're fooling yourself if you think that you're going to one day wake up and be like, I've got it all together. I know everything, like, you know, perfectly planned. That's not how life works. And so I almost want to say, like, flipping that script for us as coaches and saying, like, not that it's not important to be examples and role models for our clients in this is where you could be, this is where I'm headed, that journey. But I think it's also just as important as just as much our responsibility to show up and be like, and this is the mess of it. And this is, you know, the imperfect part of all of that, because that's not always what people are presenting, especially like as we're talking about showing up online and those types of things. Like, people don't always show up that way. And that vulnerable pieces, it's usually like, oh, well, here's the perfect story. Here's, you know, all the amazing things that I'm doing. And don't get me wrong, like I'm celebrating all of those things for everyone. At the same time, it's also important that we highlight the before, highlight the, well, where was I, or what got me to that point, or what was the imperfect journey that got me to that point.
I just had like a really deep download as we were talking about this, and
Sure.
and it was, you know, instead of showcasing perfection, showcase the progress, you know. And I think that for whatever reason, it just hit my nervous system of like, oh, people are actually more drawn to you if you show them the progress, show them the failures. Like, and I just started to connect this back to like the hero's journey. Like when you're telling a story, you know, nobody wants to tell a story where the hero just comes across as perfect, because that literally just will come across as arrogance, you know, or something like that. Like, you're not going to love the hero of the story, of the journey, if the hero is perfect. We love a hero who fails. We love a hero who struggles. We love a hero who has a hard time achieving whatever goal they've set out to achieve. That's what drives movies. You know, like if you take any movie and you see, you see the hero, and for whatever reason I'm thinking of the Hunger Games, like, and Katniss, and like that whole like she struggled throughout the entire movie in so many different ways, but like I loved her as a character because she was imperfect, because she was real. And that's why it's like, I think what's making, I'm coming back to social media because that's where I'm currently struggling with. So that's what's coming up for me as we're having this conversation. I'm wondering what would happen if, instead of trying to think about the perfect post or think about like, oh, what is the best caption that I can write here? What if I just showed up and had like just a real moment and just had an honest conversation, or just did a very vulnerable post and talked about the progress, talked about the journey, instead of trying to get to that end destination, and just invited people in to the journey. Because when I look back at my journey, I'm blown away. And I do a lot of reflection. We all do this as coaches, but like when I look back 10 years ago to where I am today, so much growth, so much incredible goodness has come because I've done the uncomfortable things, because I've made progress. But I never celebrate that stuff. I never celebrate. And I think that's one of the other struggles that I have, is that I don't celebrate enough my own small victories, my own little steps that I'm taking. I just don't acknowledge it because, and I talked about this last weekend when I was in Toronto giving my speech. When I came out 10 years ago, I never thought I was doing anything brave. I didn't think I was doing anything big. I was just like, at the time, I was just tired of pretending to be something that I wasn't. Like, that's what catapulted me out of the closet. I wasn't being brave. I was literally just being fed up with like faking it all the time and not being my most authentic self. And looking back on it, it's like, holy crap, that's a brave thing to do. It's a really brave thing to own that and say, hey, I'm tired of pretending to be something that I'm not. So I'm going to come out and own this and change how people see me. That's a huge thing to do, but I never celebrated that. I never thought it was a big deal. I never really honored coming out. And for the last 10 years since coming out, I've continuously been evolving and growing and changing, and I never give myself enough credit. I never stop and really celebrate all of the progress that I make. I only look at, oh, what do I still need to complete? What do I still need to finish? Where do I still need to grow? What's not quite perfect yet, or what's not quite where I want it to be? And so I'm always looking at where I still have room to grow, and I'm never looking back to see how much growth has already happened. And I think that's why I get into this negative headspace a lot of times around like, oh, there's still so much more work to do, and oh my God, this is exhausting and whatnot. But it's like, if I look back and I really think about the last 10 years, holy shit, y'all, like so much in my life has changed for the better. And I am a completely, totally different person today than I was 10 years ago. And there's been so much evolution and so much beautiful growth, but I just don't celebrate that. And so I'm taking a minute here on this podcast to just take a minute to celebrate that, because I've grown a lot. We've all grown a lot. I mean, I've known y'all for like 5 years now. It's wild how much growth has happened over those 5 years since we've started our friendship. And, I think we just all deserve, everyone, not everyone listening, I think we all just deserve a little pat on the back and a little bit of like, hey, I'm proud. I'm proud of the work that you've put in. I'm proud of the progress. And yes, there's still stuff to do, and there's always going to be room for growth, but never forget how much growth has already happened, because you're in it. You're fighting the fight, you're doing the things, and you're making progress. So be proud of the progress that you've already made, and then still recognize that yes, there's still growth to go, but you are better today than you were yesterday, and that's a celebration.
This is key.
I needed that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think that is such a great reminder for all of us in the personal development space, right? That we always have, like, I have a list of 5,000 goals. And like, when I think about them, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's humongous. And like, I have this massive mission of like every young person having a coach. And when I say that, I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And so it feels like I'm just sharing my truth. But when I really, sometimes I have those moments where I sit back and I hear myself, like, you know, when you hear yourself say something, you're like, whoa, what did you just say? Like, I have that moment sometimes where I hear myself say this, and it doesn't mean that it means so much to me that I will never, ever give up on that. Till the day I die, that is what I will be doing. But what I find interesting about that and what you were sharing, Tyler, is really this importance of remembering where I've been, the progress that I've made, the journey that I've been on, and actually being really intentional with celebrating that small progress. Because without that progress, I wouldn't be where I am today, right? And it's not like I'm going to wake up tomorrow and every teen's going to have a coach. That's not how this works, right? It's the journey. It's the one teen, it's the two, it's the hundreds, it's the thousands. It's, you know, like step by step we get there. And I think it's so important to remember where we have been, and also to highlight that for ourselves, because I think that, and I don't know how relatable this experience is to you guys, but I think as we're like, you know, mentioning social media, we can like hear someone else's, you know, read somebody else's vulnerable share or post or progress post, let's call it, on social media. And we're like, oh, we're cheering for them and we're, you know, delighted in their growth. But do we do that for ourselves? Do we actually stop and look at, yeah, where have I been? How far can I come? How can I celebrate myself today and the progress that I've made? Or how can I share something super vulnerable that, as much as I might tell myself, like, no one's going to care. Like, no one, that's not going to impact anyone. No one's going to care to hear your story. And when I read somebody else's, I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, that really hit me in the heart, right? Like, it's a really interesting experience that we can have, that for other people, we're like celebrating them and, you know, all their progress and their vulnerability. But then when it's our turn, it's like, oh, well, you know, that's okay. Like, you know, no one's really going to care. It's not that important. And not that it matters for other people. It's more like ourself is number one, right? Celebrating for ourselves is top priority. Like, we don't always have to go out and social media and share the news and celebrate on social media for that to be enough of a celebration. That's not what I'm saying. But I just feel like you see a lot of these types of posts, right? And so I feel like I'm just trying to bring this back to like not taking it too far to, it has to be where I'm posting all my celebrations on social media. No. That's not it. I mean, absolutely, if you feel called to do that, go for it. But that's not the only way to celebrate. And I think that it's really important to be intentional to celebrate for yourself. Like, this is like a me thing. I'm celebrating me, and I'm being with myself in this celebration and looking at my progress. Doesn't always have to be on social media. Doesn't always have to be with other people even. I mean, I'm always down for a good party, but like, it doesn't always have to be like something humongous, right? It could be like a small thing that you do to celebrate, but intentional. I think that's the difference in being intentional with the celebration, and that we are celebrating our progress. We are celebrating that 1%. That's just as important as the 10 years growth, like added up of the 1%, right?
Can I throw something in here on around celebration before I forget this? Because Stephanie, you'll love this because it's Preston Smiles, and and I know we all like Preston Smiles, and I think he's a fantastic human being, a fantastic coach. And I remember he spoke at HCI's like virtual event a couple of years ago, And during his presentation, he said something that changed my life forever. He said, ABC, always be celebrating. And he was talking about the little celebrations that we have to do on a day-to-day basis when we're building out our business or working on our dreams, because it's really hard. When you set a big goal, when you have a big life's mission, it's really hard because we get overwhelmed by the big picture and the big idea and the big goals. And we can often, so many times we can often stress and think, oh my God, I'm not making progress, or this isn't happening fast enough, or, you know, whatever the story is that we tell ourselves in our heads. You know, the reminder to ABC, always be celebrating, I've carried that with me, you know, since I heard him say that. And I use it now with like my clients. Like I'll tell them like ABC, always be celebrating. And I just remembered, like, I haven't been celebrating recently. I have not. And I had a very intentional, and coming back to what Amanda was saying about the intention, I had a very intentional practice of going to bed, and instead of doing like nightly gratitude, I was doing nightly celebrations where I was like identifying 1 to 3 things that I could celebrate from that day, you know, and they were small. Again, that's the point. Like, it's small celebrations. It's like, what are the small steps that I took today that got me closer to my goals that I've set out for myself? And that's so important. And I've just lost that recently in the overwhelm of life and in all of the chaos that sometimes ensues when life happens. Like, you know, I just lost the celebration. And so I really need to get back to, I really need to relearn my ABCs.
I love that. I love, so interesting how like we can show up for how we show up for other people versus how we show up for ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's a nice like teaser for everyone to walk away with today, of like, interesting. You know, we are so easy and quick to celebrate someone else, but when it comes to ourselves, it's not so easy. So I would say, you know, start small, and then the big celebrations, you can also easily celebrate yourself. So that's what I would add as like a final thought. Any last thoughts to wrap up today?
And I think to carry on with what you were just saying is also, like anything else, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Like at first it always seems like so hard, and like, how am I going to do that? And you know, that's never going to happen. It's going to take me 300 years. And then you actually do the thing and you're like, well, that wasn't that hard. Right? And then the more you do it, the easier it gets. Because this is a practice. What we're talking about here is a practice. And it's called a practice for a reason, because it takes practice. And so the more that we practice, the easier it does get over time, and the more automatic it becomes. It's not so like, oh, I have to remember to do my like ABCs. It's just, it comes out because it becomes more of like a habit.
Yeah. Oh, I love you all. I love all of you, and thank you so much for this space this morning. I'm feeling I'm feeling a lot different, because I woke up and I was like in kind of a funky headspace, and then just coming here and like being able to be immersed with you two and having this deep conversation, it's reigniting my spirit, and it's reigniting my soul. So thank you for holding this space.
Well, thank you everyone for listening or watching, being with us here this morning, this afternoon, this night, whatever it is for you. And we'll see you again next week.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Come As You Are, the podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram at Kaya the Podcast, and on YouTube and Facebook by searching Kaya the Podcast. If you haven't already done so, please help us keep the conversations going by subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. And be sure to join us next time for another deep conversation.